When you think of the greatest love stories of all time, what comes to mind? Perhaps like many people, you thought of Romeo and Juliet. Even in Italian, the language of love, when you say a guy's a real Romeo, it's synonymous with lover. But think about it for a second. The love for all the ages, Romeo and Juliet, well, it did not exactly end well. They did not die in vain. Their deaths were a redemptive sacrifice. It ended the enmity between their two families and restored peace and order to Verona. People love in different ways, some passionate, some more spiritual, and some downright carnal. And when it comes to people dying for love, sometimes they are the victims of jealousy and hate, and at other times they are caught up in circumstances beyond their control. And at still other times, they are making the ultimate redemptive sacrifice. They literally die for their love. Love relationships happen in so many ways, and opera embraces them all. I'm Dr. Don Feinberg. Welcome to Opera Insight 2023. Here, we will explore this year's festival season at Santa Fe Opera. We will do it in 5 segments. The first one will include a bit of an introduction and the last one a conclusion, but the segments are framed so that you can watch them in any order you like. In each of them, we will look at one of the powerful love stories in each of the operas from a psychological point of view. It is, of course, opera. This means the music tells us about this psychological story, along with the words of the libretti. But with that being said, as in past seasons, Opera Insight is about the meaning that opera has for each of us, as it explores what makes us who we are today. Opera Insight lets us hold up a mirror to what it means to be human, what is important about our productions in the here and now. Also, as our directors interpret these operas, they build a bridge for us to cross. It makes our experience more gripping. Occasionally, in these 5 brief segments of Opera Insight, the director's discretion will be highlighted. It shapes the narratives or storyline of the operas. Each of the 5 operas includes a love affair for the ages. The passion between Tosca and Cavaradossi, the Dutchman doomed to roam forever unless redeemed by Santa's lifelong devotion, Rusalka's longing to be human, to find the love of her prince, who ultimately dies for her kiss, Peleus and Melisande, whose innocent love ultimately fatally unravels, and finally Orfeo, who literally would travel to hell and back to retrieve his beloved Eurydice. 5 operas, 5 passionate and powerful, albeit doomed loves. I would have called this season Love and Death. Unfortunately, the title was already taken. But seriously though, what is the connection between love and death that makes the tragedy of doomed love so powerful? As we saw last season in Tristan and Isolde, and this season in the lyric fairy tale Rusalka, love and death sort of merge in the ending. But even without this dramatic device, the opera brings us a powerful connection of love that ends in death. Why should this be? Some people think it acknowledges our fundamental evolutionary heritage. You know, life evolved on the planet Earth before replicating organisms die. Think about it. Your basic amoeba grows, divides, grows, divides. Every one of these trillions of organisms are alive today that are somehow descended from the protoplasm of that first amoeba untold eons ago. Not so for organisms that have sex. It's only when organisms started exchanging genetic material to make an offspring to carry on the genes that the parent organisms die as individuals. Sexual reproduction goes hand in hand with death. Our passion to love one another is what makes our species mortal. I repeat, our passion to love one another is what makes us mortal. Opera compresses this archetypal reality into narratives that help us make sense of our human experience. We live, we love, and if we're lucky, we love passionately. And before we inevitably die, we find that passionate love. From a psychological view, This is our existential dilemma. For some, it is a realized despair. We're all going to die, so what difference does anything make? And yet for others, and I like to count us opera enthusiasts among this group, we recognize that life is a time-limited adventure and we should make the most of it. Each encounter with world-class opera elevates us. Sure, we're not renowned divas like Tosca, mythical mermaids like Rusalka, or divinely sired musicians like Orfeo, but we are humans that empathize and celebrate their loves as we share their all-too-familiar fate. With that said, let's jump into the 2023 season with an Opera Insight look at Puccini's Tosca. Psychologically, love triangles drive the plot, and the jealousy that leads Tosca to her famous kiss of Tosca. This is the moment when the diva who only lived for art and love turns into a murderer. Ultimately, it leads to her suicide. Now, whoa. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's take a look at this year's production. The opera was originally set in Rome. It depicted northern Italy on the brink of its liberation by Napoleon in 1800. The action takes place in a single 24-hour period, unlike, say, Pelléas and Melisande, that unfolds over many months. Thematically, our production this year recognized that that kind of brutality is not confined to one time and place alone. And this production asks us to consider a core question about our values. What we value in life, how we carry on day to day in the face of political oppression and upheaval. The opera opens as Cesare Angelotti surreptitiously enters the church of Sant'Andrea della Valle. He is an escaped political prisoner, the former consul of the Roman Republic. His sister, the Marchesa, has left a hidden key so he can hide in the family's private chapel as a part of his escape plan. This contrasts directly with the entry of the church worker there to clean and pause for morning prayer, as he is part of a daily routine. This reveals a central theme of the opera, the political struggle in stark contrast with each day's mundane activities. The painter Mario Cavaradossi enters. He has been commissioned by the church to paint his conception of Mary Magdalene. He admits to himself he cannot help but see the face of the mysterious blonde visitor to the church. It turns out to have been Angelotti's sister, but for Cavaradossi, she is mysterious and angelic, and for him, surprisingly attractive, despite the fact that she looks quite the opposite of his dark-haired, passionate love, the diva, Floria Tosca. Angelotti recognizes his old friend Cavaradossi, who has Republican sympathies. Angelotti explains he's being pursued by the ruthless chief of police, Baron Scarpia. The painter agrees to help his friend. He gives him food and tells him to hide as Tosca enters. Tosca jumps to the jealous conclusion that Cavaradossi has been talking to another woman, and her fears are increased by the Mary Magdalene in the painting that looks like the Marchesa. The painter reassures her in a gorgeous duet and arranges to meet her later at the villa. Tosca leaves, and Angelotti comes out from hiding. Angelotti plans to be disguised as a woman with the outfit left by his sister in the church for him, and now he's had the good fortune of running into a friend that will provide a good hiding place for him as well. Cavaradossi tells him to go to his villa and hide in an unused well on the property. From the viewpoint of Opera Insight, let's take a look at our introduction to Floria Tosca in the opera. Tosca has fallen into the jealous jaws of a love triangle. Psychologically, it is simply when two people compete for a third. Its origins come from the jealous longings of our childhood. We humans often find ourselves in this competitive position in pursuit of love. It is not just in opera, when our pursuit of another person is intensified when we compete with a third person for the object of our affection. When we say love triangle, almost all of us has some understanding of what that means. It is the structure of relationships that most often drive love stories, the ones with happy and the ones with sad endings. In this season, we will see this triangle realized again and again. In The Flying Dutchman, we will see the inaccurate projections, like with Tosca, or in Peleus, we will see the jealous rage evoked in his brother. But the idea of this competitive situation or love triangle occurs repeatedly to power these tragic love stories. Here in this opera, Tosca's jealous projections lead to her undoing and its tragic consequences. Why? Because of the political context in which this action is occurring. Baron Scarpia and his thugs have entered the church looking for Angelotti. Now, in our production, unlike others I have seen, the reason Baron Scarpia comes so quickly to the church is because he suspects the church of being complicit in the escape of the Republican consul. And that knowing Cavaradossi can also be implicated because he's there painting means he can be arrested and executed so he can have his way with the defenseless Tosca. How unfortunate for Cavaradossi, his sad fate, that his commission at the church has placed him in such harm's way. But with his friend at risk, Cavaradossi remains loyal and steps up to help him. Unfortunately, Angelotti has dropped the woman's fan with his sister's crest that was supposed to be part of his disguise when he escapes. Scarpia presents this fan to Tosca as proof of a secret meeting between her lover and the Marchesa. When Tosca runs out of the church, Scarpia correctly assumes she's going straight to confront Cavaradossi. He tells his henchmen to follow her, find Cavaradossi and Angelotti, and arrest them. This murderous intrigue occurs against the backdrop of the church service, the daily routine, another powerful and unsettling coupling of activity. Pay attention to the closing scene of this first act and see what it tells us about this central theme of the opera. As Act 2 opens, the powerful, unsettling joining of the mundane and the murderous political intrigue continues. Cavaradossi has been arrested and is interrogated and is about to be tortured, while Tosca is heard performing a cantata elsewhere in the castle. She arrives in the office. Cavaradossi warns her not to tell what she knows, yet after hearing her lover being tortured, she reveals Angelotti's hiding place in the well. When discovered, Angelotti kills himself to avoid capture in a powerful foreshadowing of the opera's narrative conclusion. News arrives. Napoleon has triumphed in the battle and will soon liberate Rome. Cavaradossi applauds this development and seals his fate. Now, the words of the artist and the political violence collide. It gets even more personal. Scarpia proposes that Tosca willingly give herself to him sexually and in exchange for sparing Cavaradossi. She sings her agonized plea, Vise d'arte. She's lived her life for art and love. Why does God abandon her? As an aside, this aria provides us in the audience one of the most intimate moments in the opera. It is Tosca's true inner feelings. It is out of space and time. We realize she truly has no idea that her petty jealousy in an imaginary love triangle has led to their undoing, leading Scarpia's thugs to Cavaradossi's villa. Similarly, we understand she has no idea that her life of art and love cannot be detached from the political drama unfolding around her. She emerges from the reverie of this famous aria and agrees to Scarpia's terms if he grants safe passage out of Rome for her and Cavaradossi. Scarpia readily agrees, perhaps too readily. He orders his subordinates to stage a fake execution like the Count, which we in the audience understand to be a ruse. Like the Count means they're going to tell him it's a fake and then kill him for real. And to complete this deception of Tosca, he actually writes out letters of transit for them. He knows they will never be used. But does Tosca suspect anything? Here is where director's discretion to interpret the scene becomes central. In what must be one of the most famous moments in all the opera canon, as Scarpia approaches Tosca to essentially rape her, she kills him. But why? Does she suspect his duplicity? Is she overwhelmed by the pseudo-seduction of forced sexual encounter and decides she would rather murder a rapist than make a run for it? Has she an inkling of the moment as a political assassination with liberating Republican forces literally approaching the city gates? Or is it no decision at all, but rather an emotional knee-jerk reaction of self-protection? We in the audience witness the murderous dark side of passionate jealousy. This director's discretion is rife with our understanding of Tosca's psyche. And yes, more than one of those may apply. You get to decide your experience. In any case, Tosca hides the body and leaves the scene. As the third act opens, we hear the song of the shepherd boy and the bell for morning prayer. And as we found throughout, amidst the political turmoil and personal tragedy, normal life goes on. Now, it is the backdrop to the morning's execution of Cavaradossi. He looks out at the night sky and sings the aria that appears on every collection of opera's greatest arias, Elusivand le stelle, experiencing the beauty of the night sky, the purity of his love, and the preciousness of life soon to end. Tosca arrives and explains their plan. They will escape after the fake execution. She also describes how to play dead, like in the theater. Their love duet reminds us of the futility of thinking that as individual lovers and artists they could escape the turmoil that surrounds their love and ultimately takes their lives. The execution takes place. Tosca is amazed at Cavaradossi's acting ability, and to her horror, she discovers he wasn't acting, he was shot dead. Before she can even process the shock, she hears the voices proclaiming, "Scarpia is dead and Tosca killed him." The soldiers rush in. She evades their grasp, but they chase her to the castle parapet. To avoid capture, still in shock about her lover's death, she hurls herself over the parapet wall. Her final words, "O Scarpia, avanti addio," speaks volumes about Tosca's insight on the brink of ending her life. She is prepared to stand in the heavenly court and defend her murderous action because finally she has confronted evil rather than submit and pretend it doesn't exist. It poses a central question for all of us experiencing this opera. Scarpia, like evil in the world, is not a problem of there or then, Rome of 1800, or Italy in 1900 when the opera premiered. It is in our face today. Do we carry on as if nothing is happening, or do we support causes that pursue justice in the world? Obviously, this means something different to each of us. And yet, while we may not be right in the middle of conflict like Angelotti, Cavaradossi, or Tosca, our lives are certainly less dramatic, operatically speaking. We can still be inspired to be active and not passive in the face of cruelty and injustice. A great operatic love story like Tosca does more than entertain us. It inspires us, especially in a production as powerful as this one. We continue our next segment as Opera Insight considers Wagner's The Flying Dutchman and its ill-fated love of redemption. See you then.